Remember that movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt? So he was playing Ernst Schaefer, and he was one of these great explorers that apparently found his way into inner Earth. And he came back to Berlin in 1938 with a whole stockpile of documents and other memento. And this is so interesting, Rye. The Third Reich could not waste any time. In 1938, right after Ernst Schaefer comes back from Tibet, they mount their Antarctica expedition on the Schwabian boat. And that's an area in Germany, and they just named the boat after it. And then the land became known as New Schwabia or New Schwabenland. And so they must have gotten some kind of information out of Tibet, either the directions or the permission to go there, or even the U-boat diving charts, because how would you figure that out just blindly? It seems like they had a guide.
I'm Rye, your Codega, here to lead you through the shadows of the unknown. My journeys have carried me across hidden corners of the world to places steeped in wonder, whispers, and unanswered questions. Walk with me as we uncover ancient civilizations, unravel unexplained phenomena, and chase the legends that refuse to die. Welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Codega's Codex of Curiosities, where we dive into the strange, the weird, the peculiar, everything else on the outskirts, everything else in between as well. And if you guys are listening, if you're watching, make sure you guys hit that subscribe, and would love a 5-star review. That always helps. If you're watching on YouTube, I do have members now and memberships. With that, you get early access to almost all of the videos. There will be members videos, and you get a discount in my merch store. Go check out that merch store because there is some cool gear in there. And if you guys are listening, like I said, hit a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple. That is awesome. Now, what is new? What is exciting at the Codega's Codex of Curiosities? Well, we have slowed things down to 1 episode a week just to catch up. But that means, because I'm catching up, we're going to be hitting 2 episodes again every week. And I'm going to be slipping some lives in there as well. So if you are listening on audio, make sure you jump onto YouTube to catch those lives. Okay, without further ado, we are bringing back Brad Olsen. Brad came on earlier and we talked about Antarctica. We talked about the Black Goo. We talked about the New Schwabenland. And we talked about Admiral Byrd as well. But of course, we only scratched the surface. We need to go a lot deeper. So without further ado, and without keeping them waiting anymore, Brad, welcome back to the Codex of Curiosities.
Hey, Rye, thanks for having me back. Yeah, we covered so much ground last time. We thought, boy, we better do part 2 because there's still more grounds to cover.
There always seems to be more ground to cover. These episodes that I have, maybe they're just an hour, 2 hours, even ones that hit close to 3 hours. There's still always more. You've done a ton of research. You've literally been to Antarctica as well. I think you took a sailing expedition there. So, hearing from you is great because it is not only research, but firsthand account as well, because you've been there. Now, where do we start with this one? Actually, before we start anymore, let's let people know where they can find your books. And I think you have a website as well. If you can just let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. So for me and projects I'm working on and my conference schedule, bradolsen.com is the website to go to for that. And then for all my books and the other authors we publish, including the new Secrets of Antarctica, you can go to cccpublishing.com. And if you choose some of my books, then I'd be happy to sign copies for people too.
Oh, that is awesome. And it's cccpublishing.com. I know another company that's CCC as well, Codega's Codex of Curiosities. Great minds of
both. There's a logo too.
There we go. Yes. We might have to team up when I'm writing. Well, I am actually currently writing a book, so I don't have a publisher yet. Hey, it just might, land exactly the way it should be.
We'll talk.
Definitely. So speaking of talking, where do we start on this one? I know maybe giants. We can jump into giants, or should we say Nephilim, or what should we call them? The men of renown. But let's go with giants to begin with.
Okay. Well, yeah, and we did jump over that chapter last time, but there is a whole chapter in my new book called Lost Lands and Patagonian Giants. So Patagonia is that area in the far southern tip of South America. That's both Chile and Argentina. And I start with this quote from Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were the old, the men of renown. So if we just start with that, it's saying that they came from some other place, presumably above, and they saw that the earth women were fair and beautiful and took it upon themselves to mate with them. And then they had offspring. And to me, this sure sounds like the makings of the Anunnaki coming down, which were very tall, and then the offspring being the Nephilim. And indeed, while I was on my trip to South America, before and after the Antarctica trip, we went to the Sacred Valley in Peru, where there are museums where you can see the elongated skulls down there, which are fascinating. And I cover this a lot more in my book, Beyond Esoteric, Suppressed Human Origins, because a lot of this information does not get out to the Western world. When you're down there, though, I mean, in Peru, they're just like, oh, yeah, we had giants. And here they are in a museum in Paracas where you can see dozens of these heads that are like this big, Rye. I'm not kidding. They're 30 to 35% larger than we are. Our skulls, mostly in the back here, they get the big bulbous back, but the eye sockets are 30% bigger and the connection to the spine, too. So we're talking about a human-looking but human-like, but not quite human. Different DNA altogether.
Now, that's an amazing thing that you're bringing that up is, a lot of people allude, they're like, oh, these elongated skulls are from, they call it binding. They're like, oh, no, they're binding. But I will say that you can change it. Of course, you can change the shape of the skull, but you can't change the volume of the skull.
Correct.
So if you're saying that they are 30% larger, but they're elongated 30% larger. So if I was binding my skull when I was a baby and, I would just change the shape, but I can't change the volume. It's 30% larger. That's a lot. It's not like there's 5%. 5%, well, maybe then we'd throw that out. We're like, nah. But we're talking 30%. And the eye sockets, also, like you said, the connection of the spine to the cranium is different. It's not evolution. That's not adaptation. That's different.
That's right. And they also are missing the central suture crack that humans have on our skulls that you do not see on the elongateds. And the other thing, too, you made a really great observation, Rye, that you just can't bind heads and create more mass. You can't create more cranial capacity is the way that they're measured once you have a skull. And they actually drop BBs into them, like from BB guns. And however many BBs will fit into a cranium is the number cranial capacity. So I think most modern humans are about 1,600 And these are coming in at about 2,300. So clearly much, much bigger cranial capacity. And then with a bigger brain, with a bigger body, you've got the whole notion that possibly these are some kind of extraterrestrials. And you're right, there are cultures in the world that do head binding, and the Flathead Indians of Idaho and the Nez Perce used to put boards on their heads and bind. In Africa, they did. And when I was in the museum in Tiwanaku, which is in Bolivia, just over the border from Peru, there was a whole exhibit about head binding. And they weren't going as far as to say these are a different species. But what they did say, and I thought this was so interesting, is that the royal members, the royal family, were the main ones who did it. So it's almost like they were imitating those real elongated skulls and saying, oh, hey, we can do it too. And that makes us special like you guys. So quite a tradition in South America for that.
It is. And this type of tradition as well, a lot of people believe the Egyptians did the same thing. They believe that the Egyptians had elongated heads as well, hence the headdresses to try to cover or to copy. And that's the biggest thing, is what you're saying is copying. They are trying to copy. And it's a lot of times where people try to, we'll just take modern life right now. You know, maybe a sports athlete or an actor cuts his hair differently, or he dyes his hair a different color, or wears different clothes, something unique. A lot of people will copy that because they look up to this person. This person is put on a pedestal. They're a hero to them, and they want to emulate that. So that is what's happening here as well. Exactly like you're saying. And I find it fascinating when you said this earlier, when, you know, you're in Peru and they're talking about giants and these elongated skulls as matter of factly, like this is just everybody knows. But it's almost like when you hit maybe like even Mexico or northern Mexico, there's almost that buffer or a filter of sorts where this information just kind of stops. You know, it doesn't enter, or if it does, it's brushed off as like tales, fairy tales, non-existent, and just hoaxes and lies. But when you hit more South America, this becomes more reality. They know this as a matter of fact.
Yeah. And you know what else, Rye? Also matter of fact down there, you could talk about aliens, ETs. The Great White Brotherhood is this benevolent group of ETs that supposedly has a base down under Lake Titicaca, which is right there by Tiwanaku. So you could even talk about space visitors or interterrestrials, and they're among us. No problem.
Which is interesting. So I'm going to pose this question to you, and you know, we truly don't know. But do you believe they're from outer space, or do you believe that they're interdimensional and or part of this fallen group of angels? What are your thoughts? Because again, like I said, it's all speculation.
Right. Well, can I say all the above? As well as interterrestrial? Because look, how have we been programmed to look to the skies and the extraterrestrials are coming down? We're always programmed to think that they're coming from out there, and I'm sure some of them are. But what about right below our feet? What about the inner terrestrials from Earth? And in my book, I have a whole chapter on the inner Earth and what could be civilizations that live within there, as well as Antarctica ETs. So I've compiled quite a bit of evidence that they do exist. And then the third point you mentioned are the ultra-terrestrials, those that can phase through our matter and aren't quite completely material like we are, that there are many different varieties of extraterrestrials, interterrestrials, and ultra-terrestrials.
I think you're correct on that. Like, I do believe that we are being visited. Maybe they are all the above, and that they are just located in different areas and they've just settled. Like some have settled on inner Earth, which I believe is Agartha. Agartha, is that what it is called?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Agartha.
Yeah, Agartha. Yeah. So there's some that have settled in there. There are some who are interdimensional, crossing over, and there's some who have settled maybe in outer space of sorts. And but they all come from the same place. And a lot of people believe that they are. Oh, there we go. There's Agartha.
The land of the advanced races in Agartha. Yeah. And so the city of Shambhala is a singular location, but Agartha is the whole general region. And as we touched on last time, the Germans had directions in their U-boat maps, specifically stating, you're going to Agartha. This is the original duplication of the U-boat captain maps. We translated it on the top in English so people can read the directions. And you know how Germans are. They're very exact. They say, you dive your U-boat 53.2 meters. That's exactly what they mean, right? No room for guessing here. And so when they say Agartha, I believe them. I think they did find some advanced civilization within the earth. And we've got the maps in here and the diving directions to prove it. I mean, this is the smoking gun that the German U-boats made their way under the ice. They come up at lakes under the ice, then they dive again, directions, compass points, even the tide charts when the best time to take the U-boats in to these inner earth passages. And if you were to see a map of Antarctica without the ice, there are these deep fjords that go well into the continental landmass. Like here, this is Antarctica without the ice. You can see that there are huge bodies of water. And then that arrow is where we charted those directions that were in the U-boat maps. So there's a whole world under the ice here. And that's part of what's so fascinating about the Antarctica research is that just like they were doing those scans of the Giza Plateau last year and finding the whole complex down under the Great Pyramids area, they're doing that in Antarctica too and coming up with some incredible findings.
Wow. Okay. I know we started with giants and now we're going to Agartha, which is perfectly.
We can go back to
that okay. Well, let's go back to the giants just a little bit, but I do want to circle back to this because I find that fascinating, and I don't want to I'm going to put a pin in that. The Patagonia giants, like a lot of stories that we've heard about giants, are very like ancient tales, like biblical tales and whatnot. But Patagonia, from what I recall, it's more of a modern tale, kind of like the maybe the Cook Islands, maybe as well. I'm not sure. There was another one where there was giants as well, but it's more of a modern tale, like that. It's not too long ago that giants were sighted in this location.
Correct. Well, if we just look at the history of Magellan, was the first sailor to go around the world. Well, actually, he was killed in the Philippines. He didn't quite make it, but his crew made it. And his historian, who went by the name Pigafetta, he documented the giants. And he said that one day they were wintering over in this location called San Julian, which I went and visited on my way down to Antarctica 7 years ago. And he said that they passed 2 months in the place without seeing anyone there. One day we suddenly saw a naked man of giant stature on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. The Captain General, Magellan, sent one of our men to the giant so that he might perform the same action as a sign of peace. Having done that, the man led the giant to an inlet in the presence of Magellan himself. When the giant was in the Captain General's presence, he marveled greatly and made signs with a finger raised upward, believing that he had come from the sky. Isn't that interesting? Just in the same way that we would if we can't figure something out. Hey, maybe there are aliens coming from some distant location. The giants felt that way too.
Which is fascinating. So the giants were, this giant was thinking that Magellan was coming from space?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they had never seen something like a Spanish galleon. And I've heard the same thing happen to Christopher Columbus when he reached the island of Hispaniola, which is today Dominican Republic and Haiti. That was his first landfall. And the same thing, they thought basically essentially an alien. because they couldn't figure it out. That where would a Spanish galleon ship like that come from, if not from the sky, and just appear there in the bay one day? So Pigafetta goes on, and he says that this giant was so tall that we reached only to his waist, and he was well proportioned. His face was large and painted red all over, while about his eyes he was painted yellow, and he had 2 hearts painted on the middle of his cheeks. His scanty hair was painted white. He was dressed in the skins of animals skillfully sewn together, and that animal had heads and ears as large as that of a mule, a neck, body like those of a camel, the legs of a deer, and the tails of a horse. So he's kind of wearing animal hides, but making himself look like one of those animals.
I have a question, Brad. So let's rewind to the looks. So they said that his face was painted white, they said?
The hair was white. He had 2 heart shapes painted in the middle of his cheek, and his eyes were painted yellow.
Okay, so there's a gentleman, he's Paul Stobbs. He talks about what he says the Nephilim looked like clowns. Okay?
Wow.
So when you're saying this, this is, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, So this is fascinating so Magellan's, it was his second mate or his cartographer that was writing this all down?
The historian. Who was recording all this. Yeah.
Which is fascinating because, and this is the thing that a lot of people will listen to what the historians say, but as soon as something like this comes up, it's like, that's just an allegory. That we're going to throw that away. We're going to throw that out. We're going to just listen to everything else but these kind of bits and pieces. But there's truth to this. Like if I went and I saw, I don't know, a horse for the first time, no one's seen a horse, and I've described it, everybody else be like, oh, that's crazy. That's poppycock. We're going to throw that out. But everything else that I've done, they'll believe. And I find that just disingenuous. We need to listen to what these historians are saying. Maybe they might describe things slightly different than what we see with our naked eye, but this is fascinating. So I truly wonder if his face was painted those colors or if his face was that color. Like, because that's what Paul Stobbs is believing, is that these colors, these clowns, that is what they actually looked at. Like jesters and clowns is what their skin actually was. So maybe as someone who's never seen it, it looks like his face is painted white or red. I think they said with these yellow, and his eyes and all these things. I would think that would be colored, painted, but perhaps that is just his actual coloring, which is terrifying actually if you see that kind of thing. But interesting. Okay, so where else? What else did he write about this giant, or what happened after that point, or did they continue with that?
Well, so then he goes on, but he does say here it was painted yellow. So I do see the word painted in this case. But maybe, again, they were imitating the Nephilim or...
Of the original Nephilim. Maybe these are the seraphim. I think they're called seraphim, is the children of the Nephilim. Maybe they're, portraying exactly like we said with, you're trying to copy the rock stars or you're copying doing the head binding. Maybe that's exactly what is happening as well.
Yeah. And so then he's wearing this clothes that resembles animals. They don't take off the head of a mule. They leave the ears on, for example, the neck and a body like a camel, the legs of a deer. So that kind of reminds me of the skinwalker, where the shaman in the Southwest would do the skinwalker dance, and they would wear the hides of wolves and other animals and kind of take that persona on of those animals. So then he goes on to say that his feet were shod with the same kind of skins which covered his feet in the manner of shoes. In his hand, he carried a short, heavy bow with a cord somewhat thicker than those of a lute and made from the intestines of the same animal, and a bundle of rather short cane arrows, feathered like ours, and with points of white and black flint stones in the manner of Turkish arrows instead of iron. these points were fashioned by means of another stone. So they had bow and arrow, and that's pretty advanced technology for primitive people, if we want to call them that. But what I also found really fascinating too, Rye, is that all the subsequent explorers after Magellan, when he found the passage, which is called Magellan Strait, between southern Patagonia and Terra del Fuego, other mariners would go there, and on their maps, they depicted giants. And in no uncertain terms, these giants are literally twice the size of the Europeans. So their shoulders come up to their waist. So again, they're human-like, but they're not quite human. And you can't really make out if any of the giants that are depicted here have elongated skulls, but many of them are wearing the headdresses. So that's very similar to the pharaohs and even the popes who wear the mitre hats, which some say is disguising the elongatedness of their heads. And so some of the pharaohs like Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, which had the big hat out and back, and even their nephew Tutankhamun. And I have the CAT scans of Tutankhamun in my book, Beyond Esoteric. And I tell you, they're elongated. They are elongated skull, human-like, but not quite humans. And so no wonder they were worshipped as living gods, as pharaohs.
Of course. They were positioned into those positions of power, through genetics or through their family lineage, that they were already planted in there, and they just continued through that. And I think it's very important that when we look at royalty, a lot of times royalty marries only royalty. They try to keep these pure bloodlines. It is not common at all where they stray out of those bloodlines to marry a commoner or something like that. And often they will marry within their own family just to keep that lineage. So it kind of it gives a lot of credence towards this, that they are a different type of species and they want to keep that genetics strong within their family, within that family lineage. And like these royalty, they marry often other royal families, probably because they are of these same race, I guess we could say. Yeah.
And they even said in the age of the pharaohs that they would marry their cousins and then they would keep the lineage going. But that creates genetic defects. And it's not good to mate with your own family lineage generation after generation. So then they started having health issues from doing that.
It's true. We've seen it in our own species as well. When there's interbreeding, the genetics become degraded, and that's why we kind of like seek out other. That's why you don't marry within your family. Don't keep it in the family, people. I'm sure we all know that.
Evolution has a way of making things right. Things you can do and things you shouldn't do.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. Okay, so one last question then about the giants here. So if giants, like, I believe they existed in Patagonia, and now, and which isn't too long ago. So the disappearance should be possibly recent enough to leave a trace. Do you think that the giants were like wiped out, assimilated, or were they deliberately erased from the record?
Well, that's what's so interesting about where did these Patagonian giants come from? Because they're really, in the time of Magellan, when the first Westerner to spot them, this was the main location. There weren't really any reports of the elongated in Peru and Bolivia when the first Spanish made it there, that perhaps they had already died off or moved on or whatnot. But there was a book that came out in the 19th century called The Smoky God, and it was a nonfiction book about a father and son Norwegian duo that went on a sailing excursion to the north. And they found a hole that took them into inner Earth. Now, I'm just telling you the way this story goes. because they painted it as a nonfiction account. It was written, you read it, it's kind of like a travel guide. And I quote some of that in here. And so it really harkens to the fact that these inner earth beings, this land of advanced races in Agartha, could very well have also been giants. Maybe not the elongateds, but maybe so. So he goes on to say, his name is Emerson, that they, as they approach the equator on the way out, the stature of the humans grow less. But as the Patagonians of South America are probably the only aboriginals from inner Earth, those who came out through the aperture usually designated as the South Pole, and they are called the giant race. So Emerson describes the Patagonian giants in his book, The Smoky God. Quote, there was not a single man abroad that aboard who would not have measured a full 12 feet in height. They all wore beards, not particularly long, but seemingly short-cropped. They had a mild and beautiful faces, exceedingly fair with ruddy complexion. The others had beards, some were thick and black, others sandy, and still others yellow. So not all black hair. And we've heard about the elongated skull giants. You can even see some of them in the Paracas, Peru Museum that have red hair. And that's a common trait with giants elsewhere, including where I'm at here in northwestern Nevada. They found red-haired giants in Lovelock Cave and other locations around here. And then I've seen other elongateds with red hair in the Black Sea area that they found. So he goes on to kind of talk more about what they looked like, 10, 11 feet tall, very human-like, but not quite human because they were so tall. And they were richly attired in costume, particularly themselves, and very attractive. They dressed well, and they were very advanced. We have discovered that gold was one of their most common metals known, and that was used extensively in decoration. He went on to say he saw other displays of gold. And then the story concludes around the surface of Antarctica when the father and son emerged from inner Earth. The father died in a storm trying to navigate his ship from the lost continent, Antarctica. The son, though, rescued and was thrown into, when he got back to Norway, thrown into an insane asylum for daring to tell the world where he and his father had been. So these kind of stories didn't float very well, even when he had some semblance of proof in the form of his eyewitness accounts and maybe some artifacts that he brought back too. But his father died, and then he sailed back, and he made the comment that he thought those Patagonian giants were from this inner Earth, and they too came out of the South Pole aperture, this giant hole in the ice. We talked about this last time, and that the closest continental landmass to Antarctica is South America. So these could be the throwbacks of some of these giants that lived in the inner Earth, and then many generations later are the giants that Magellan discovered.
That is fascinating because, perhaps they were a little more advanced, but if they left and were kind of like isolated on another island, sometimes you regress in your technology, or you regress because you don't have access to certain tools or certain things. So maybe they were more advanced, and then they kind of maybe step back a little bit. But that is so interesting that there's many accounts, and especially that this comes from Antarctica as well, the lost continent. And yeah, this is fascinating. Okay, so we were talking about, like, oh my gosh, what were we talking about that I said we'll put it? Yeah, yes. So Agartha. Can we dive into Agartha now? Don't mind that pun. That's a terrible pun. But
so starting with the Germans, that they had maps that would take them to Agartha. And I was working with this research assistant named Frank DeComrie. He's the one that alerted me to these maps and all the other information that was privy to the U-boat captains. And they were following these instructions very carefully to the T. They would get deep under the ice in Antarctica, following one of these fjords, and then coming up at lakes, and then going down again under some ice, and then popping up in this, I would call it a mythical land, because we've never seen anything quite like it. It is what is below the ice in Antarctica. And like I said, they're starting to do scans now and finding traces of what could very well be described as civilizations. And so in the U-boat map directions, they get so far as to say that when you get to the lighthouse of Agartha, the U-boat captains were instructed to pull out the Packet 3, it's called, and we have not been able to locate that yet, but it was a way to describe how the crew and the captain were to behave once they got to Agartha. This is depicted in there. And so you can see these fjords are so deep, they go for hundreds of miles. And if they were to follow those, one of them, this one on the top here, goes pretty darn close to the South Pole. And that is where the hole in the ice is as well. So now you have U-boat routes to get to this area. And then you also have the hole in the ice that you could fly a plane into, like Admiral Byrd said he did. And when I talked to Brian S., Linda Bolton House whistleblower, who saw it, who did a flight over it, they defied the no-fly order because they had to do an emergency evacuation. He said there was a road that went there and corkscrewed down. So you can get there by road, water, or air. And then this is also in these German maps that they have this under ice terrain. And here is the South Pole entrance. You're going under the pack ice, and then you're getting to these other locations. Here is New Schwabenland, New Berlin. There's a U-boat redoubt, it's called, where you can get your U-boat repaired. And these are all these mythical lands, Asgard and Liberia, places that we've never seen.
Sorry, Brad, did you say Asgard?
I did say Asgard. It's right here on the map.
Okay. So we got, the, oh my gosh, like Thor and Loki and...
Right.
Yes. Wow. Okay.
Hyperborea. I mean, the Nazis were utterly fascinated with this idea that their ancestors were of this high-tech civilization, both in inner Earth, say under Tibet Plateau, but also inner Earth in other areas that they were making great effort to make contact with. And so they were sending expeditions to Tibet with Ernest Schaefer. Remember that movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt? So he was playing Ernest Schaefer, and he was one of these great explorers that apparently found his way into inner Earth. And he came back to Berlin in 1938 with a whole stockpile of documents and other memento. And this is so interesting, Rye. The Third Reich could not waste any time. In 1938, right after Ernst Schaefer comes back from Tibet, they mount their Antarctica expedition on the Schwabian boat. And that's an area in Germany, and they just named the boat after it. And then the land became known as New Schwabia or New Schwabenland. And so they must have gotten some kind of information out of Tibet, either the directions or the permission to go there, or even the U-boat diving charts, because how would you figure that out just blindly? It seems like they had a guide.
So, Brad,
to tell them.
I heard through Tibet is you can get access to Shambhala. Shambhala?
That's right.
So maybe that is where, and it would be much harder to actually get an expedition up there, like you wouldn't be able to, much harder to bring vehicles, maybe not even be able to fly planes or anything. So you could hike into there. It sounds like that's what he did. And then they found another entrance into it. They were given directions on how to, maybe he was given passage. And that is exactly what it sounds like they did. They have their guide on how to get in through Antarctica.
Right, exactly. And through Tibet, through the Giza Plateau, through Mammoth Cave. There are other areas that's indicated on this drawing to get in there. And the other thing, too, and I still don't know how to wrap my head around this, is that they always say there's a central sun. And this was in the Orion files that went to the Soviet Union. Because keep in mind, right after World War II, the Soviets were the very first to get into Berlin and some of the other cities in Eastern Germany that had the headquarters of the Army, the Navy, the Luftwaffe, and the Anna Nurbe Society. And so this is an actual German map that was captured by the Soviets with a central sun. And it was in what's known as the Orion file, that they were aggregating all this information that they had gotten out of these high command offices and the Anna Nurbe Society, which literally means the search for our ancient ancestors. And that's why they were doing these Tibet excursions. And that is why I think they also went to Antarctica, because they got tipped off that there was this advanced race there. And they wanted to make contact with them, and they wanted to set up their New Berlin base, which is actually listed on the map under the ice as accessible via the U-boat routes. So it's just really fascinating stuff. And then when we charted it out with the directions given, Frank DeCalmer, this research assistant of mine, had this way to go. The Agartha, which he even says on the map, is very, very close to the South Pole, within 100 miles. So this is where the U-boat ships were going under the ice, and they had what they needed down there. So if a U-boat came in damaged, it could get repaired. If they needed to let some people off, there was the New Berlin City, there was New Schwabenland under the ice as well. No, we always think that New Schwabenland is the area above the ice, but in these maps, it's also indicated as below.
Which is so interesting. You know, I'm sitting here trying to imagine that scenario, like how that was built, how it would look underneath. You know, it would be almost like a dome, like the ice would create a dome. And I think we talked about this last time. Maybe it was like, you know, thermal vents that would be melting the ice up to a certain point where it would be freezing and melting at the same. It would hit an equilibrium, but just thus creating also, you know, fresh water as well, which is just
and a heat source and an energy source.
But I wonder though, it's like, because when I think inner Earth, I think you got a ball and then you got to go in, down, and in, right? Which means like physics might not work exactly like we see here, like gravity. So like, how does a boat go down and in and back around? Like, is there any writing about that type of navigation? Any type of like how they access through a gate or something? I don't know.
Well, that's what was written about in the Smoky God, that the father and son found the northern aperture, found their way all the way through, and then popped out in the south. I don't know how to wrap my head around that either, nor the central sun concept. But let's just talk about inner Earth for a minute, because what's underneath the ice, and you don't even really have to go into the continental landmass, just under the ice, you could say is inner Earth. The cave systems throughout the world, like Mammoth Cave. I used to go there as a kid with my dad, and it's 5 levels down. It's over 100 miles of cave. Is that inner Earth? I mean, kind of technically it is. And then what about all the deep underground military bases, all the DUMBs around the world? Some of those are miles deep. That's inner Earth. What about the throat of a volcano that can also go down many miles deep? That goes into inner Earth. So that there's variations of what inner Earth is, and I don't think we can really dismiss it outright as just saying, oh no, that's just fantasy. So you kind of got to go with where the evidence is pointing you. And in this case, with the U-boat maps and these directions and the utter fascination that the Third Reich had with this inner Earth civilization that they were just so bound to make contact with. And perhaps they did, because they came in contact and they started to develop very advanced technology for their time to be flying dish-shaped craft in the early 1940s, and then spotted in South America and Antarctica and other locations all around the world after that, including the Battle of High Jump, which we depict on the cover here, showing these honeyboot crafts coming out of holes in the ice up out of the water. So they're actually able to distort the gravity field around them so they can travel through the water just as easily as they could through the air. And they had this technology 80 years ago, right? It's just, to me, it's just, how did they get so advanced so fast? They must have had help from above.
I do agree. It's just so fascinating when you hear this, and I don't know. Like,
well, in fact, I'll even quote Hermann Oberth,
okay,
who is one of the paperclip Nazi scientists that was brought over after the war. At his retirement party, somebody asked him that. How did the Germans get so advanced so quickly in the 1930s and 40s? And he said, quote, "We cannot take credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone." He says, "We have been helped, and we have been helped by the people of other worlds." That's a direct quote from one of the top Nazi scientists that worked for NASA, that was working right alongside Werner von Braun, starting up NASA.
And Werner von Braun also talks about references of the, oh my gosh, not the ether, but the firmament.
Right.
They're privy to some information. They had their hands on some information that we just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What about, okay, so if we're talking...
So that's what part of this book is, right? It is a history book, the untold history of the ice continent. And the untold history is how these Germans became so advanced and what their fascination was with the ice continent and their colonies that they set up down there.
Okay, so I have a question. Do you think Germany lost the war, or they just gave up on that front and moved? It's like, you guys can have this. We've now leveled up. See you later, kind of thing.
Yeah. So the fighting forces of the Third Reich did surrender, but the Third Reich, as a political party, or the National Socialists, they did not surrender, nor did the SS. Never surrendered. And Hitler, in one of his final speeches, talked about the last battalion, that there would be a final German battalion post-war that would have some control over parts of the world, I would think, Antarctica. And so I'll just read you this quote. It's really fascinating, that Hitler gave at the very end of the war. 129. Here we go. So in one of Adolf Hitler's final speeches in 1945, he referenced the last battalion as a force that would fight from the outside, quote, "from the outside after the war." On February 24th, 1945, Hitler made a prophetic speech at the end of which he said these words: "In this war, there will be no victors and no vanquished either, but only the dead and the survivors. The last battalion, however, will be a German one." In the final months of the war, the Kriegsmarine Admiral Karl Donitz was tasked with a secret mission to move the last battalion out of Germany, presumably to Antarctica. At the end of the war, there were over 100 U-boats that were unaccounted for and just disappeared. In Hitler's absence, Admiral Donitz signed the surrender documents for all of the German armed forces in early May 1945, but not for the Third Reich or the SS. They went underground. And Rye, I think we can make a case that the Fourth Reich began in Antarctica at the end of World War II. And so what's really interesting is right now, Stuart Swerdlow is starting to do a bunch of interviews again. He's one of the last surviving Montauk boys, and he's a wealth of information and a wealth of contact. And one of his contacts was born and lived out his life, the multi-generational Antarctica Germans who've lived there. And it recently has told Stuart that we wish we could come above ground. We wish we could tell everybody that, and these are his words, that the Fourth Reich exists, but we just don't know how the world is going to handle that. We think that they might get really pissed off and just send an invasion force and nuke Antarctica. So they're kind of forced to stay underground. They're forced to remain this hidden last battalion force under the ice in Antarctica.
That's a great point. It's like, if they truly were there, if they are there, which they very much could be, how do they present themselves at this point in time? Hi, yeah.
It's us.
It's us. Hey, remember us?
Can we join you guys now?
Yeah.
We're cool with it.
Yeah, we're cool. We're cool. We got some advanced weaponry and whatnot. But hey, we just all want to get along. And I don't know if that's a possibility.
How would you react? I mean, think about it. Oh, the Fourth Reich has been around for 80 years. They're operating under the ice in Antarctica. They've got technology beyond our wildest dreams. There's nothing we can do about it. We've tried to dislodge them in Operation High Jump, and we tried to nuke them in Operation Argus. All failed, and they're still there. In fact, Carrie Cassidy at Project Camelot, she has a book called The New Berlin Base. It's written in German, but it's been translated. And the guy starts out by talking about his early life being born down there under a dome of ice. And eventually he finds his way out. He gets to the surface, makes his way back to Germany, and writes this book. And it got to Project Camelot, and they've posted it on their website. The other thing too, Rye, is about 2.5 years ago, in the middle of the Antarctica winter, which is, by the way, it's middle of summer there right now. But in the middle of winter, the most unlikely time of all, both Linda Moulton Howe and Michael Sala reported on these German-speaking people that just showed up at the McMurdo Station, the American base, the largest base, and they'd come over the surface on cat track, and they're just saying, "Get us out of here. We got to go. We got to go home. Well, just get us to New Zealand. Get us off the continent." And they were all German speaking, and they just showed up in the dead of winter when it's so cold and so difficult to travel. And so Linda Moulton Howe, she was then talking to Gene Decode, and he does a lot of interviews about the underground bases. And right around that time, 2.5 years ago, there were these very anomalous earthquakes on the Antarctic Peninsula, 10 kilometers down, 5.5 on the Richter scale, in a place that very rarely or never has earthquakes, but it's like boom, 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 boom. And it sort of showed a track line of where the underground tube would go to South America. So Gene Decode was telling Linda that they were taking out their way of escape. They were taking out some of the escape routes. And so these Germans just said, okay, we're out of here. Let's just get in a cat track and go to McMurdo and see if we can get out of here. So there's all these little data points that shows that the Germans lived multi-generational lives. And people like our age would have been born there and had their own kids. And they're still working for this German Nachtwaffen is the name of their secret space program. And Richard Dolan has coined the phrase, the breakaway civilization. And this would certainly fit all the criteria for a breakaway civilization under the ice in Antarctica.
I want to hear more. I want to hear more. Like I have so many speculative questions about this. It's like, or thoughts about this, actually. It's like, okay, they're these earthquakes that you were saying, yeah, it definitely sounds like if they're consecutive and almost in a linear, it sounds like somebody or something was doing something down there. For them, that doesn't sound like it was something good.
Right.
And I would assume that there should be some sort of access point, not boat access point, but maybe something else in Argentina where there might be some sort of cave coming up in there, just for the very fact that that's where Hitler was. Everybody, CIA documents were released. Hitler was in Argentina. You'd think the leader of the Third Reich would have some access points in there, or maybe he wasn't allowed in. I don't know.
These are pictures that the FBI did, mock-ups of what he would look like surviving the war. The History Channel did this great series for 3 seasons, about 30 or 40 episodes, called Hunting Hitler. And I went to a lot of those locations in South America where they filmed this TV series. I think, it was on the History Channel. And one of those was La Falda. And I did the tour of the Eden Hotel there, where he was very good friends with the very wealthy benefactors who owned the Eden Hotel. So I took the tour, and afterwards, fortunately, the tour guide, he could speak English pretty well because my Spanish is crap. And I said to him, "Do you really think that Hitler survived the war?" He goes, "I don't have to think. I know it." I said, "How do you know it?" He says, "Right here in town in La Falda, there's an elderly woman. She's about 90 years old now, but she was a teenage chambermaid in the Eden Hotel, and she had eyewitness reports of Hitler and Eva Braun, his wife, and even their dog Blondie, the German Shepherd, got off a U-boat. Maybe they went to Antarctica first, but then they went to La Falda, and there are even the FBI documents that said if Hitler were to escape, this is one of the first places you should go look for him, as well as San Carlos de Bariloche, which I went to. And I've been to Germany several times, Rye. You go to some of these towns in South America, you swear, geez, I must be in Bavaria in southern Germany right now. It just looks just like it. European cities.
There's a huge German influence there, of course.
Yep.
And it's that's why I'm suspecting that there has, of course, Argentina is right on the tip, heading there. But I'm wondering if you're saying that they had these possibly underwater tunnels, underwater escape routes, and they popped up in Argentina, and that's maybe why Hitler was there. But maybe I don't know. Maybe he didn't like it. Maybe he liked Argentina better. I'm on my way out. I don't care about any of that anymore. I just want to retire now. I don't know.
Yeah, and they said he had many different safe houses. And in the TV series Hunting Hitler, they went to the Analco house. And I tried to get near there. It's near Bariloche. But you can't. It's the ultimate gated community. You can't get close to it. I got above it, maybe a mile away. But in the TV show, they took Zodiac boats and then they swam ashore because there were security guards there at the Analco house. But what they found was there were stovepipes around the property showing that there was some kind of underground facility there, and those were the air pipes. But they also found an airplane hangar right on the lake for a seaplane. So if the authorities were moving in on him at the Analco house, they could just rush him out and fly right over the crest of the Andes Mountains and be in Chile. And look, our CIA was deposing democratically elected leaders like Pinochet in Chile. And then there was Perón at the end of World War II, who was a known Nazi sympathizer. So they were letting them just live there and get away with it. And the money man, Martin Bormann, who was tried in absence at the Nuremberg trials and put to death if they would ever catch him, he keeps popping up all over South America in the 1950s. And he was the money man. He was the number 2 at the end of the war and controlled all the wealth that they smuggled out of there, including metric tons of gold, as well as stocks and bonds to corporations at the time, and even priceless artifacts like the Spear of Destiny, which many think
Really?
They have been taken to Antarctica.
So do you believe? Okay. Okay. Next episode, Spirit of Destiny. So, do you
We're
believe?
going to have to go episode 3, right?
Yes.
We're going deep
Yes.
here.
Artifacts. I would. Yeah. I'd love to talk about the Spirit of Destiny. So, do you believe that
Here it is.
you believe? So
It's in the book.
So the Germans had the Spear of Destiny.
Oh yeah, here's Hitler getting it from the Habsburg Museum in Austria when they annexed Austria in 1938, and he was absolutely fascinated with it. He says that his quote, "I knew with immediacy that this was an important moment in my life. I stood there quietly gazing upon the Spear of Destiny for several minutes, quite oblivious to the scene around me," spoke Adolf Hitler in 1938. So what is the Spear of Destiny? Well, supposedly it was the spear that pierced the side of Christ when he was on the cross by the Roman named Longinus. And it could even have blood DNA on it. Who knows? But it was the spear that Charlemagne had during the First Reich, and he was the head of the Holy Roman Empire in the Middle Ages. Then it passed on to Hindenburg, who was the Second Reich, and then Hitler got his hands on it on the Third Reich. And so what's also very interesting is that Patton, who actually became a bit of a sympathizer and said, we've defeated the wrong enemy. We should have been going after Russia. Germany really shouldn't have been our enemy. And his troops found it. But I don't think that the Germans would give it up so damn easy. They just left it in a bank vault in Nuremberg, I think. And they just found it way too easily. So a lot of people think that that was a replica and the real one went to Antarctica. And that's why the Antarctica Germans have lived this long and somewhat invincible in their fortress under the ice, because they still have the Spear of Destiny in the Fourth Reich.
They have other artifacts as well that they just, yes. Stay tuned next episode for, crazy artifacts and that the Third Reich has taken with them, or the Fourth Reich now has in Antarctica. Oh,
what a museum they might have down there,
right? What are they doing with these things? Like, are they actually controlling more than we know? And when you said like the last battalion will be, from the outside, you said something about like
right.
They'll be controlling things from the outside or be victorious from the outside. I personally think as well that it has a lot to do with Operation Paperclip. I think Operation Paperclip was very strategic, where these Nazi scientists were placed strategically throughout the modern world, more or less, and they just picked up where they left off.
Right. The last battalion would be a force that would fight from the outside, exactly as the Fourth Reich would be. So rather than ruling out of Germany, the Reich over Europe, then they went underground and became more of an intelligence agency. There's a book called The Third Force, which basically explains during the Cold War, you have the Soviet bloc, the Allied NATO bloc, and the Third Force, which is underground intelligence force, which is the Fourth Reich, fanning the flames of discontent, keeping us both at odds with each other while they go about and continue to do what they do. And so for those who don't think that the Germans still held a lot of power also in Germany after the war, take a look at this. The Allies. Oh, yeah, we defeated the Nazis. The Nazis, Werner von Braun, head of NASA. Walter Haltzine, head of EU Commission. Adolf Hetzinger, NATO Chief of Staff. Kurt Waldheim, Secretary General of the United Nations. how do you get more powerful than those four positions? And so I've met Joseph Farrell, and I've read his books and heard many of his interviews. He is one of the deep dive researchers, along with Henry Stevens, who did The Black Sun and the book called The Third Force. And they said that the Germans, especially the paperclip Nazis that came over here, they were given diplomatic immunity. So they could go to the border of, say, Mexico or down to South America with an attaché case that would not get inspected. And they would trade off attaché cases with each other and come back with new documents. So they kind of had the run of things, and they found their way into the biggest corporations, into government institutions, into our educational systems. And they tried to place at least one top person who is sympathetic to Germany in all these positions. So this is the untold history, Rye. This is what has been going on for 80 years. And look, there's an old saying that history is written by the winners. We think we won World War II, but I'd say it's a pretty good sign that actually Germany, if they didn't, you can't say they won the war in Europe, but they won the intelligence war and perhaps this next stage where they became this third force or this Fourth Reich. And with colonies and micronations, even in South America and elsewhere.
I think it's extremely, like, when you're listening to all this and you realize they sacrificed their country so that they could win the war. There was many sacrifices given as a, almost like a ritual, almost like a sacrificial offering to appease the population, such as they sacrificed Germany for that, right? Germany laid down and the country itself lost. Okay.
Right.
Then we also look at the Nuremberg trials. What happened then? Well, how many were actually executed? I don't know the exact number, but it was minuscule. So it was an appeasement. Like, here you go. And everybody was
consolation prize.
That's exactly. But everybody was satisfied with that. They're like, okay, yes, this is good enough. When in fact, they were infiltrated by people with no country anymore. It's kind of like their allegiance was to an ideal, not to a country. And so by sacrificing the country, whereas everybody is so patriotic, this is the thing, is where everybody is so patriotic that they believe that once the country fell, that it was over. But in fact, it was the ideal the idea that lived on and that these people lived by. And it's really interesting to think about that, and that they infiltrated. They were from the outside now, so to speak. You know, this lost battalion, this extra battalion is now infiltrated, and its roots are deep, but it has no home. And I think that is very dangerous. Well, of course it could now, Agartha definitely could be the home, but many of it just might not have a home. And that is extremely dangerous. I like how this conversation went, went from giants to Agartha to the Fourth Reich. What more could you ask?
And the inner Earth.
And
and they all have a tie-in connection together.
Exactly. So Brad, what next? I would love to have you back on again, so we can have another discussion. I would definitely love to talk about some of these ancient artifacts and go into more depth about it. And, not necessarily where they are now, but just even if you have any idea about some of these ancient artifacts, and we could do a history lesson on those ones.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do it beyond esoteric, which I have a lot of these out-of-place artifacts and more information on the giants and this untold history, the long line of history. As Graham Hancock says, everything gets dated older and older and older. And so my next book, which won't be out for 2 more years, can't do that yet, but it's called Underwater Archaeology. and it documents megalithic sites underwater. Now, how do you build a megalithic site underwater? It could only have been when the sea levels were much more drastically lower than they are now that you could do that kind of construction. But I'm collecting the research, and actually my 13th book, which is a couple years after that, is going to be Giants of Antiquity. So I'm in this game, Rye. I've been collecting this information for over a decade now in my esoteric series of books, and now in these next two after Secrets of Antarctica.
Fantastic, Brad. I'm really looking forward to this. So that's what's on the horizon for you. You have 2 more books already, you're working on. I'm sure there's going to be even more than that. But if anybody is looking to find you, are you doing any conferences upcoming, or also just give them where they can find your books as well?
Yeah, sure. And I'll be at the Tucson, Arizona MUFON conference on February 20th. That's coming up in a couple weeks. That'll be my very next conference. And then it's Alien Event in Los Angeles, New Living Expo in San Rafael. Then I'm flying out to New York for the New York Awakening at the end of April. Then I've got Sedona, Arizona, Rise of the Guardians in early May. And then I fly to Germany, where I'm doing this book and the new presentation in front of a German audience, where I'm going to talk about the U-boat maps and going under the ice. So maybe we'll do a interview after that, and I'll tell you how that goes.
Yeah,
We're
done. Let's. And when is that? You said that's in April. You're doing that?
That'll be in middle May.
Okay, so end of May. I'm booking you for an interview. End of May.
You bet. Let's do it. And then I'm also going to the Bosnian Pyramid Conference in middle June with Dr. Sam. So I'll have an opportunity to climb around and go in the tunnels underneath the pyramids in Bosnia, the oldest pyramids, presumably in the world, but certainly the oldest pyramids and the only pyramids in Europe.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know about that. I interviewed Dr. Sam.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I would say about a year and a half ago, I interviewed him. I stumbled upon that. And so if anybody's wondering about what? Pyramids in Bosnia, go check out my episode. I will, I'll have the link in the show notes. It's a fantastic, he gives a fantastic interview. It's really interesting. Of course, there are people who are always trying to debunk things. They're always like, oh no, that's not real. But there's too much mathematics, I will say, that prove that this is something that is not natural. This is man-made.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll come back with some firsthand information about the Bosnian pyramids in June after that.
Okay, so then an episode at the end of June then too.
We're already getting booked well into the summer. Yeah, right?
Brad, we're gonna have you back as a regular guest on here. So Brad, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time again.
My absolute pleasure. Really great talking to you again, too.
Awesome. Everyone, Brad Olsen, Giants, like I said, Giants, Agartha, the Fourth Reich, Spear of Destiny, U-boats, Nazis, everything. I found it really interesting and fascinating. I was very enthralled by this one. Lots of information. And if you guys want more of that, go get his book. Go check it out. CCC Publishing, I believe it is. I remember CCC. That's an easy one. Of course, all the links will be down below. And if you have any questions, feel free to write me, ask me some questions. I can pass them on to Brad if you want. And we can go from there because he's definitely coming back. I had a great time and I'm really looking forward to end of May. Yeah, let's bring him back end of May. All right, everyone. Until the next time, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies. Aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks. In the void of secrets, a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies. Aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks. In the void of secrets, a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the Earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. Giants, cryptids that come